Welcome back to my channel, Navigating Midlife Live. Menopause, hot flashes, sleep, and brain fog. Uh, I'd like to call them the trifecta. They're probably the most common talked about symptoms, or at least that's what I hear from my clients. Hot flashes always seems to come up top on the list, and then sleep, and then brain fog. And of course, there are many other symptoms that women can experience while they're navigating the stages of menopause, but these seem to be three of the most common or popular, whatever terminology you want to use. So, what can you do, and why is this happening? And is it directly related to menopause, or is it related to something else? Is it related to stress, or is it related to another maybe health condition that might be going on in your body? So, I'll talk about all of those things today. Let's start with hot flashes. What's going on? Why are they happening? And what can you do about them? Well, basically, your hormones are changing. That is the biggest thing. So, what happens in the stages of perimenopause is your estrogen is going up and down. It's not very stable, so it's going up and down. And what's happening with your progesterone, in most cases, your progesterone is slowly declining through the stages of perimenopause. It's those spikes of estrogen that start to cause the hot flashes. And what's happening is there's a mixed signal that's going to your brain. So your brain is thinking, oh, we've got to do some things here. I'm detecting some heat. And your body just kind of goes into this immediate reaction of trying to cool things down. And of course, your blood vessels are dilating. And I actually used to really chuckle because one time I looked at myself in the mirror as I was getting a hot flash, and I looked like one of those little red thermometers. Like I was literally turning red from the bottom up, and it was just hilarious. And I even had situations where I'd be in meetings at work and have a hot flash. And the men in the room would be looking at me, and then somebody would suddenly say, "Are you okay?" And I'd say, "Yes, I'm fine. I'm fine. Just a little warm." I didn't, sort of out and out say, "I'm having a menopause hot flash." I, just kind of said, "I'm a little warm." And then, of course, after that, after you cool down, because your body's reacting so quickly, trying to cool you down, one, you can feel clammy because of the sweats. Some women sweat really profusely. I used to literally drip. I could feel the sweat gathering on the top of my lip. And, I at one point just had this very, just dab it with my finger. You figure out ways to just kind of deal with it, especially when you're in a corporate setting or, other settings where you just don't really want to bring attention to yourself. But the other thing that was really funny, one time I actually noticed that I had beads of sweat on the tops of my hands, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy." And I just got used to wearing, short sleeves, dressing in layers so that I could take my jacket off. And then, of course, as soon as you start to cool down, you then, of course, get the chills. So then I put my jacket back on. So it was a back and forth thing. So, is it directly related to menopause? Can hot flashes be caused by something else? I get women telling me that, oh, I had hot flashes for 10, 15 years. I was recently presenting this past weekend for the Be Embraced Foundation. And I've had women say to me, that they went through it for 20 years. And I said, well, that's something else. If you're still experiencing hot flashes, I would recommend that you go get your thyroid checked and have a complete thyroid panel done, because there are a lot of situations where women are feeling hot flashes, and they could actually be related to thyroid issues that are going on. So I'd highly recommend going and getting that checked out. Don't just assume that it's menopause and this is just a normal part of, the aging process. It's not, because hot flashes really should not continue for that long. Could it be stress related? Sometimes for some people, when they get really anxious and they get that hit of cortisol, sometimes that makes them sweat. So it could be that, maybe you're just not dealing with stress very well, and that's making you sweat. So there are definitely other possibilities. But if you're, kind of in that age, if you're sort of late 30s, early 40s, and on, it could be related to menopause. And I'm not trying to be really vague here, but there are underlying issues sometimes that aren't directly related to menopause. So that's why I'm making you aware. I just want you to be informed. So what can you do when you're experiencing hot flashes? Are there things that you can do to help the situation? Well, you can laugh if you want, but this baby was my best friend when I was having hot flashes. I carried it with me everywhere, and I was not the least bit shy to pull it out when I was in a corporate meeting and start fanning myself. And yeah, people would look and I just smile, I'm warm. It's all good. But literally, this fan was a savior. And I, would meet other women that would sometimes be in the meetings, and they'd be, oh my God, that's such a good idea. And so, yeah, get a beautiful fan. This is a beautiful silk Chinese fan that a friend of mine gave me. And it's well worn. It's been through a lot of meetings. So, I'd recommend one of those. Now, with respect to other things that you can do, and unfortunately, when we go through the stages of menopause, it is advisable. We don't have to, but it is advisable if we make some changes. And one of the things that I see that has a big effect on women is sugary refined foods, or just very highly refined foods in general. But a lot of times, cookies, donuts, cakes, those types of things, when they're really sugary, those can absolutely add to hot flashes. So those are the kinds of things you want to be aware of. If you're wanting something that is sweet to sort of satisfy that sweet craving, reach for fruit. Fruit is going to be a good option, and I'd recommend a fruit that's a fairly high fiber. Mix that with some nuts so you're not getting that blood sugar spike, and you've got a really good snack that's, giving you that sugar sort of craving that you might have. So it's sort of satisfying that a bit, and will hopefully blunt the hot flash as well too. Alcohol is another one, and mostly because of the sugar content, but also alcohol. What does it do? It dilates our blood vessels. So, that's just sort of adding fuel to the fire. And then another one, and it doesn't do it for everybody, but coffee can be one that, that does affect women. So what I would recommend in that situation is matcha. Switch it over to a matcha or a green tea, and see if that starts to sort of calm down your hot flashes. With respect to alcohol, there's some really nice non-alcoholic beverages out there now. I mean, they can still be high in sugar, so I'd watch out for that. But sparkling water is a good one. There's no sugar in just plain sparkling water. So if you're looking for something just to, change your palate, those are good options. So now let's talk about sleep. And hot flashes, or night sweats, as they're sometimes called, kind of can disrupt our sleep. But there's other things that are going on with respect to our sleep as well too. So one of the things that can affect our sleep is the change in the progesterone. As I mentioned, the progesterone is slowly dropping. Progesterone is our hormone that allows us to relax and chill and does help to improve our sleep. So as that's changing, a number of women will feel that they're not falling asleep as easily, or maybe they're waking up, and sometimes they're waking up to go to the bathroom, but sometimes they're just waking up and they're wide awake, and the brain, as most of us women, right, the moment we're awake, it's like boing. What am I going to start thinking about? What's on my to-do list, or what didn't I get done? I'm definitely guilty of that, and I always have to tell myself, shush, we can't solve any of this right now. It's time to sleep. We'll have to deal with that tomorrow. If you really have an active mind, sometimes it's beneficial to have a piece of paper on your bedside where you can write a note. And I even mentioned to somebody who had a very active mind, I said, have your phone on, use the note function, but just make sure your phone is on airplane mode. Then you've got an idea, use the note function and, dictate yourself a message. That way you don't have to put on a whole bunch of lights. But the whole thing about sleep, so as I mentioned, it is the hormones that are causing that. But if you're having to get up to go to the bathroom, it could be what you've had in the later part of the day. So that's where I always recommend, cut back on the coffee. Don't have any coffee after lunchtime. And after dinner, just watch how much you're actually drinking after dinner. It's fine to have, maybe a small cup of tea, but you don't want to be drinking too much at night. You want to make sure that you hydrate yourself well during the earlier part of the day. But it could also be things like sugary snacks, those types of things, maybe eating too many carbs at dinner. This is where, and okay, let me just, I'm guilty. I used the word carbs and I didn't just, distinguish between what types of carbs. So, of course, all fruits and vegetables are carbs. But if you're looking at the starchy carbs and you haven't cook them the day before for them to become a resistant starch, then potentially that starch, of course, turns into sugar, that turns into energy, that could be disrupting your sleep later in the evening. So if you're going to have starchy foods at night, make sure that they've been cooked the day before so that they're cooled. Even if you reheat them, they turn into a resistant starch, and they're not going to have that effect on your blood sugar. Of course, I'm always promoting having lots of dark green vegetables, the really fibrous vegetables at dinner, to help fill you up, because sometimes as well too, when we're going to sleep, maybe we haven't eaten enough in the day, and then all of a sudden it's bedtime and I'm hungry. And what do we typically go for? A quick snack that might not be the best option. So make sure that you're getting enough protein throughout the day. That is going to help you sleep better at night. Some other options with respect to sleep is starting a whole routine around sleep. So, for me, after dinner, I dim my lights, like quite dim. And not that I'm working in the dark, but I, dim as many lights as possible and only have the light on, where I absolutely need it. And I've got my lights on dimmer switches so that I can actually really turn the light down as much as I want. Then the other part of the routine is, of course, these lovely little things here. Technology, our iPads, our phones, all those types of things. I recommend turning those off an hour before you're actually going to head to bed. That blue light, even if you're wearing the glasses and stuff like that, we may be reading things that are activating our brain and getting our brain thinking, or watching a show that might have us on the edge of our seat, and then we go to bed and we're thinking about this drama that we just watched. So I recommend turning all of those off. If you want something to do, read a book, a good old fashioned paperback or hardcover, but a regular old book. The other part is of course your sleeping conditions. So you want your room to be nice and cool. You want your bed, of course, to be very comfortable. And I always say I love my big comfy bed, because it is. It's just so comfortable. When I crawl into it, I just feel like I'm being hugged by the whole thing. And having your room nice and cool, that might mean having a window open to let in some fresh air, and of course having your room very dark. You don't want ambient light coming in from outside. And of course now with all of the LED lights that cities are installing in their street lamps, they're a whole lot brighter than what they used to be, and so that can be very disruptive to your sleep. The other thing that I just recently heard, and I have not tried this, but I found it very interesting, and the person that talked about it said it works for them. If you have a very active mind and it's just not calming down, this person recommended um, taking a face cloth and wetting it with cold water and putting it on your forehead. And I remember that my dad used to get really bad migraines, and that's something that he used to do, put a cold cloth on his forehead to, relieve some of the tension in his forehead. But apparently, this cold cloth, if you put it on your forehead when you have a really active brain, it helps to calm down the prefrontal cortex and can actually help you sleep. So I'm going to try it one of these times. If I wake up in the middle of the night and my mind is going and I can't fall back asleep, I'm going to try the cold cloth thing and see if it actually works. And if it does, I'll pin a comment back to this post. And and then of course the night sweats, right? The hot flashes, the night sweats, those can happen as well too. So again, this is where it becomes very important as to the things that you're consuming earlier in the day. How could they be disrupting you at night? So you do want to take a look at the things that you're eating and drinking, those types of things. Now, the other thing is the brain fog. And, the hot flashes, the sleep, the brain fog. This is why I kind of call them the trifecta, because they kind of go together. Because, if the hot flashes are disrupting your sleep and your sleep is being disrupted, then you've got brain fog, you're not thinking as well. But again, there's other things that are going on. So, lovely estrogen, um, the changes in the estrogen can also start to cause issues with brain fog. Now, I have a theory behind this, and I'm not going to say it's scientific, but I think that also for a lot of us, where brain fog has become maybe more prevalent or more noticeable, is we have so many things coming at us. I can't remember how long it's been now that I have my phone on silent all the time. I do have the vibrator function on my phone working. I'm holding it here, looking at my phone. You can't see it, but yeah, that I have like all the sound turned off so that my phone is not dinging and all that kind of stuff. But I do have it on vibrate mode so that if a phone call comes in, of course, I can hear the vibration and I can answer it. As far as any of the other things go, I do see my email notifications. And I think that a lot of times we feel, because these are with us all the time, that we have to respond immediately, that if an email comes in or if a message comes in, that we have to respond immediately. And I stopped doing that, and I turned off all of my notifications on my social media accounts and stuff. I do go in and I check to see if I've gotten comments or messages with respect to, my Menopause Navigator social media accounts. And of course, I'm always, looking at my email messages that come up. Those are the notifications that still show on my phone. But I do believe that we get so heightened and so aware of these things, buzzing at us and doing all kinds of things, that adds to our distraction. And there's so many other things that are going on. I mean, in my office, I'm sitting in front of my laptop, and I still have an old fashioned landline that rings. That's my business line. So sometimes that's ringing, and I always used to feel obligated to jump up and answer it right away. That comes from my corporate days of sitting in the office, and when the phone rang, you answered it, unless you were with a client. And I've got my iPad here, and I've done the same thing, turned off, I put it on do not disturb when I'm working. I've generally got music playing on that, but we have so many things that can distract us on a daily basis, and that starts to affect our abilities to pay attention. And of course, as we know, there's been a lot of discussion as well too, is social media is making our attention spans shorter and shorter. I think all of these things are feeding into the issues around brain fog, not being able to remember a word. And something that I started to do for myself is when I was thinking of something and I got distracted, or I opened up my phone and something else was there and I looked at it, and then I was like, why did I open my phone? What was I looking for? And what I do is I actually just take a moment, I just stop and I take a moment and I take a deep breath, and it's like, what was I going to do right before I got distracted? 98% of the time, I remember exactly why I was going there. It's the same thing, you get distracted and you walk into a room and you go, why did I come here? What was I coming to get? And I do the same thing. What was I thinking of right before I got distracted? So I'm training myself to stop and think, just to, kind of go back into my memory of where, what my action was before I got distracted. So those can definitely have an effect. But if we're not sleeping well, and we all know, even, even before menopause started, if you didn't sleep well, you knew that you were going to have, sort of a groggy head, that it was going to be a little bit more difficult to think that day. And, so if our sleep is being disrupted, that doesn't help. And add in some hot flashes, and, it's just like, oof, I'm done. So it is important, and so all that's why I say this is sort of a trifecta, because the three of them are all related, most definitely. The other thing with brain fog, this is where absolutely the food that we're eating is really important. So a lot of people, there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want to take supplementation. One of the things I recommend is getting enough of those omega-3s through the food that you're eating. So, beautiful wild sockeye salmon, nice fatty fish, and eat that a couple of times a week. And you're definitely doing not just your brain. I mean, we know that the omega-3s are very good for our brain from food, but it is also very beneficial for other parts of your body. The omega-3s, that fat in the fish, helps to keep our skin more moist. It keeps our joints more moist, our eyes more moist. So there's a lot of benefits to having fish at least twice a week. Sardines are another good one. It's kind of funny because they were something that, it was sort of an inexpensive treat. Years ago, when I lived at home, my dad loves sardines. And sardines are sort of having this moment right now, because they're very high in omega-3s. They've got the bones in them, so they're high in calcium. This is a lot of benefits. And, a can of sardines has a good amount of protein in them as well, too. So those are the types of things that I would recommend, is from a food standpoint, if you're not one to want to take supplementation. The other thing that's beneficial, walnuts, right? If we look at walnuts, and they kind of look like little brains. So the fat in the walnuts, very beneficial. Or things like ground flaxseed, add that into your, if you eat oatmeal, add that into your oatmeal. That's a great way to get some additional fats as well, too. So those are all beneficial. Now, you might be saying, okay, but do I need to do these things if I'm on hormone therapy? Because my hormone therapy seems to be getting these things under control. I would still recommend making any of these changes that I've suggested today. All of them are going to be beneficial because here's my view is the healthier we make our body, or this the more support that we give our body when we're going through the stages of menopause, even if we're on some type of hormone therapy, menopause hormone therapy or bioidentical hormones, even if we're on those, every bit of support we're giving our body is just an extra benefit. Um, any type of a therapy is going to work way better when you're supporting your body as at the same time. So, yes, these tips are great for women who want to try and navigate menopause in a more natural way, but these tips are also very beneficial for anybody who is on some type of a therapy. So, with all of that said, now also one thing I didn't talk about is stress can disrupt sleep. There are other health conditions that can disrupt sleep, things like sleep apnea, those types of things. Same thing with brain fog. We shouldn't just assume that once we turn 40 that everything that we're feeling is associated to menopause. It's still important to go and get these things checked out. And, even if your doctor is sort of dismissing you and saying, well, you're at that age and these are the things that are going to happen. So it's probably just menopause. Explain to them how debilitating these things are, because as women, I think a lot of us feel, I'll just push through it. I'll get through this. I don't need to, go see the doctor. I've felt this way before, or, I'm used to not sleeping well because when the kids were little, all that kind of stuff. We shouldn't push those things aside. And that's why one of my slogans is put yourself first, because menopause is the opportunity for you to start to put yourself first. So do make an appointment with your doctor and just reiterate, these things are affecting my quality of life. They're affecting the way that I work. They're affecting the way that I am with my family. And I also would say, don't just accept them saying, well, go on hormone therapy and see if that helps. Get them to run a good panel of blood tests to check things out, to make sure things are okay. If you're not sleeping well, this is where maybe, a sleep observation to make sure that you don't have sleep apnea, because that is something that can happen to women as they go into menopause. We don't want to just assume, because that can actually be very life threatening. So, yeah, you have to advocate for yourself. And there's nothing wrong with, questioning the things that your doctor is suggesting if they don't feel right for you, or if they're just sending you away and saying, let's just monitor things. No, generally, by the time a woman goes into a doctor, she's feeling pretty bad. So, you really do need to advocate for yourself to be heard. So if you are, sort of questioning what might be going on, I do have down in the description, I have a link to a document that I created. It's called the Menopause Wellness Snapshot. And you can access it through the link that's down in the description. And it's basically just a series of questions to sort of ask you, how you're feeling. So it's a moment to focus on yourself. And in that document as well, too, if you look at everything and you have some questions, I do offer a 30-minute free complimentary consultation that we can just chat, and I can answer your questions. In fact, I'll bring that up because um, if you're one of those women that you're watching this and you're just saying, no, I'm ready, I don't need to check off any boxes, I am ready, I want to talk to somebody, you can go to my website and schedule a 30-minute consultation. But as I say, it's also in that document as well too. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you. Sometimes just talking it out and making, I guess, having that conversation can sometimes just make sense of the whole situation of what you're feeling. So uh, that's sort of what I wanted to cover for today. I hope that you found this beneficial. They are simple, easy little tips. And you might think, well, that's so simple. Is that really going to help the way that I'm feeling right now? You'd be surprised how, the smallest thing can make such a big difference because every woman is unique. So, what is working for another woman might not work for the next woman, or a change that another woman makes that doesn't work, maybe it will work for you. You never know. It's always worth trying, right? What have you got to lose? So, thank you very much for joining, and I appreciate the time that you do spend. And if you do have questions, you most certainly can contact me directly or you can post them down in the comments. And I will be back again next Tuesday for another episode of Navigating Midlife Live. Have a great day.